I'd like to sum up everything I've been saying in these lectures with a final example. A final example of the system of checks and balances as it exists between the three branches of government. So it starts with a Bankruptcy Act. Bankruptcy in the US is a way for a city, or such as Detroit, or a company to restructure itself, to get rid of its debt. And of course, it's an important piece of legislation. And that's something which the federal government does. That's within the jurisdiction of the federal government. And at one point, there was a project to reform these bankruptcy laws to make it more difficult to declare oneself bankrupt. So in 1997, when Bill Clinton was president, the bill was sent to the bill was introduced in the House of Representatives. Then it was sent to the Senate, which approved a slightly different version of the bill. Members of both chambers gathered and wrote a compromise bill, a reconciliation bill, called the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2000. So that's a usual negotiation between the two chambers. And you can notice that it took 3 years from the moment when the bill was introduced to the moment when it was finally sent to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton used his pocket veto. It did not sign the bill, and because Congress adjourned, the bill simply went away. So here you have an example of the executive branch intervening in the legislative process. Bill Clinton was opposed to the bill, and he used one of his powers, the pocket veto. New attempts were made to pass the law, but they failed. They failed notably because of filibusters in the Senate. You remember, a filibuster is when a senator talks and talks and talks to block a bill. So the legislative branch could not find a new compromise, it could not create a new bill, and the project died. So in the first step, it went through the legislative process, it was blocked by the president, and it died. The project was resurrected in 2004 with a new strong Republican majority. And this time the president supported the bill. So the executive branch introduced the bill again. It went to the Senate approved it, it went to the House approved it, it went through committees as well, and finally the bill was sent to the president, who signed it. So we have the process with a bill introduced in the Senate, referred to a committee, then sent to the other chamber, sent to a committee, approved, sent to the president signs it, it's a law. However, that law imposed restrictions on certain agencies which specialized in debt management. So there were some pieces of advice they could no longer give. They had no right to give. And one firm, which was specialized in bankruptcy, found that it could no longer do its job the way it intended to. And it sued the United States. It filed a complaint arguing that it should be able to tell its clients whatever it wanted, because it was the First Amendment, freedom of speech. If they had freedom of speech, they should have had the right to tell their clients whatever they wanted. So now this is part of the judicial review process. We have someone complaining about the law, and that triggers the judicial review process. The Supreme Court could not have looked at the law itself. But because someone was complaining, because someone was suing, then the judicial review process began. It went to a district court in the federal court system. And the district court found the law unconstitutional. It went to an appeal court. The appeal court said the law was too vague. So it found the law to be unconstitutional, violating the First Amendment. Finally, it went to the Supreme Court, which accepted the case, and with a unanimous 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court said, no, the law does not violate the First Amendment. No, the law is not too vague. The law is constitutional. It is valid. So, back to the Constitution. Does the law reflect the Constitution? The answer was yes. And here we have the complete circuit. We have a bill introduced in the House, approved by both chambers, pocket vetoed. A new bill in 2004, approved in both chambers, signed by the President, applied by the Executive Branch, which triggered a lawsuit which reached the Supreme Court, triggered the process of judicial review, and finally the law was upheld. So it all started in 1997, it ended in 2005, 8 years between the first attempt to the moment when the judicial review process was over. A few key notions to come back to things we've discussed in this series of lectures. I'd like to emphasize the fact that the Constitution is the constant and most important reference in the American political system. Everything goes back to the Constitution. We've seen that the judicial branch is in charge of checking whether what the other two branches are doing is constitutional. So we have a key text and we have an institution in charge of checking that the text is respected. I'd like to emphasize the role of symbols as well. We've seen that the Constitution is not only a political system, not only a historical document, but a national symbol used by cartoonists and political parties. We've seen that the President has a very important symbolic role as well, and that some of his powers derive from his symbolic role. Another key notion, the system of checks and balances. What we've seen is a system built on compromises, a system in which everyone can block everyone else, with many compromises between the branches of government, but also between the federal government and the states, the Federalist Compromise. And if you pay attention to the political news from the United States, you've probably noticed that this system, built on compromise, isn't working very well at the moment. There are too many divisions, and these divisions are too deep. The two parties are too strongly opposed to be able to collaborate. And the political system is usually considered to be paralyzed in the United States because it has a system built on compromise and two parties which do not want to compromise. And the most visible result of this is a weakened legislative branch, a weakened and very unpopular Congress. And it will be interesting to see in the 2014 election if the newly elected Congress is able to make progress, if it's able to create a new sense of popular approval for this institution. And that concludes this series of lectures. Do not forget to do the quizzes, do not forget to have a look at the extra documents, and thank you for your attention.